So in the previous tutorial, we talked about how to install, we talked about the craft command a little bit, and we set up our basic project. So since we installed all of our dependencies, if we just run craft, we could see that we have a lot more commands to work with. Some of these commands include craft auth, which is an awesome command. It actually creates a whole authentication system for you, which we'll talk about that in like maybe the third or fourth tutorial. We have a craft key command, which generates a new secret key, which is what you saw when it said a new secret key generated. And down here we have our craft serve command, which we used in the last tutorial in order to run the server. If you want to know any more about these commands, you could run craft help and then enter the command name. So for example, craft help serve will tell you a little bit more about the command. So you see some of the options we have here. So you can change the port, the host with the -b, which is -bind. You can set the server to auto reload, which we'll look at when we start coding. And you could set the interval of the reload. So, and when you make a change while this is reloaded, there's a 1-second delay for most computers that's able to catch up. But if you have a faster computer, you could set the interval to something like 0 or 0.1 seconds, and that'll speed up the interval process of reloading the server. Again, we'll explore that in a little bit. Okay, let's clear this out. So let's actually open this up in our code editor. I'll be using VS Code. And you'll see we have a little bit more than we are used to Django. So I won't be going over every directory right now, but the one that we'll be using the most in this tutorial and the next tutorial is this routes directory, which will put all of our web routes here, as well as our app HTTP controllers directory, which will put all of our controllers here. If you're used to an MVC architecture, this makes a lot of sense to you, but if you don't know what a controller is, it's basically just a class, so a welcome controller class with several methods on it, which are called controller actions or controller methods. So this specific controller just shows that welcome screen that we saw in the original tutorial with the installation. But we'll talk more about controllers later. So let's open our web file, and you see here we have a get route, which this is the route method. So get, post, patch, put, delete, all that stuff. This is the route that you want to match. So this is the home route. This is the controller that you want to map to. So by default, it'll map to this directory and then anything inside this directory. So we want to map to the welcome controller, and we want to map to the show method or the show action. And if you remember, if we open that up, this is the welcome controller, and this is the show action or method. I'll use those things interchangeably. So if we open again our routes file, you'll see that we also have a name for our route. So this is really good. You should name all your routes, because in development, the route name probably isn't going to change, but you might change your URL a lot. So for example, if we're building a blog, you might call a route blog.posts, and you might change this from /blog to /blog/posts halfway through development. So once you do that, you won't have to worry about changing it all over your code, as long as you always point to this name, which helps a lot with refactoring. So this might look simple, but this can get very, very advanced in a good way. So this section is actually really versatile. So for example, up here, we could see we have a post, and we can make this a post route, and we might want to make this a store endpoint. So this would only be executed on a post route, and we could change this controller action to like a store action, and then we can make a store action on our controller. Also, what a lot of developers like to do is that they don't necessarily like the syntax, so they usually opt for using route helpers. So these are get and post helpers. It's basically the exact same thing, except it gets rid of this redundancy. So we could say get and post. Now that's entirely up to you. You could use whatever you want. I personally prefer to use these helpers just because it looks a little bit cleaner. So another thing we could do with these routes is we could say, we could put a middleware on the route. So this might have an auth middleware, which comes by default. So if we open up our middleware configuration file, which I know I jumped quickly to there, but it's under config/middleware, right? Same file. And if we go down here, we have a couple of route middleware. So we have a couple of ones out of the box. We have a auth middleware, which will redirect the person anywhere they need to go, such as the login page or whatever you choose to do. If you need to modify this, you can go to the authentication middleware, which is in your project. So this says if the user is false, then redirect to the login page. We don't have that yet, but we will when we create our authentication system. So back to our routes. So we could have name routes, middleware routes, but we'll just keep this tutorial really simple and we'll just focus on these two things. Now, the next thing that most developers opt for is using route groups, which we can import here as a route group. So a route group, this might be sort of redundant, right? So we might want a middleware on this route, but we also might want a middleware on our second route. So this right here can get really redundant. So anytime you see redundancy here, you should implement a route group, right? Which just takes a list of routes. So we can move that up into there. So now we have a route group and these routes are in the same group. We could specify a parameter here, such as middleware. And now all of these routes inside this group are going to have a middleware. So we can get rid of that now. Now also some routes might have similar names. So this might be blog.welcome and blog.posts, right? So there's also redundancy here. So we can specify a name prefix as blog dot. And now we can get rid of this blog dot. So now this is blog.welcome, blog.posts. And if we go back to our terminal, this terminal down here, I might flip back and forth to it, just so you guys know. But if we go back to our terminal and clear this out, we can see that we have a craft show routes right here. So if we actually go ahead and run that, craft show routes, you can see that here we go. We have our two routes here. We have a get and a post route, right? Slash and slash store, which is right here. And our names are blog.welcome, blog.posts, and they both have an auth middleware because they're in this route group. If you're a little OCD like me and you like to keep everything lowercase, we could say import that as group, and then we could have group there. And we could see if we go back, we have the same thing. So it's really that simple for routes. Next, we can move on to controllers.